I was recently looking at two different construction sites, and the contrast was almost eerie. On one side, you have the typical Western scene, a major bridge project that's been delayed for 3 years because of local council disputes, environmental lawsuits, and a sudden shift in funding after the last election. It's a monument to vitocracy, a system so caught up in its own procedural rituals that it's forgotten how to actually build anything. But then look at the 2026 macroeconomic blueprint coming out of Beijing. There's no flood irrigation here, no desperate splashing of cash or tax cuts designed to buy a quick spike in poll numbers for an upcoming election. Instead, it's what experts are calling precision drip irrigation. It's clinical. It's the surgical channeling of billions not into consumer vouchers, but directly into quantum computing nodes and next-generation semiconductor fabs. While Western capitals are currently bracing for another year of electoral volatility, where every 4 years the entire national strategy gets tossed out the window to satisfy a new set of voters, this 2026 plan is functioning as a seamless junction between decades of planning. It's the difference between a relay race, where the runners have been training together for 30 years, and a game of musical chairs, where the music stops every 4 years and everyone forgets what they were doing. It makes you wonder, is the freedom we talk about in the West becoming little more than the freedom for the mediocre to hold the competent hostage? As we watch Boeing's systemic failures or the literal crumbling of Western bridges, the 2026 Chinese strategy suggests a different civilizational logic, one that measures success in megawatts, nanometers, and patent conversion rates rather than applause. We are witnessing a watershed moment where one system is meticulously managing its growth, while the other is simply trying to manage its own entropy. And that really is the core mission for us today, to get past all the political noise and just look at the cold, hard mechanics of civilizational planning. We're going to be dissecting the structural and the political decisions that create this enormous divergence. You know, the difference between the decaying infrastructure many of us see every day and the surgical long-term investment laid out in the East's 2026 economic blueprint. We're really going to focus on long-term industrial policy and the hard economic metrics that seem to be driving a strategic spring in the East.
It's a really critical distinction, and it goes, far beyond simple economic differences. What we're analyzing here are fundamentally different approaches to achieving what you might call civilizational resilience. The sources we're looking at, they really drill down into the how. How does a system actually achieve that kind of multi-decadal planning and execution when other systems are just, well, they're stuck in procedural and electoral paralysis? We have to start with the financial architecture. That's what makes this long-term thinking even possible.
Okay, let's unpack that. We started with this idea of precision drip irrigation, moving away from flood irrigation. In financial terms, what does that actually mean? I mean, what are these financial tools that allow for this kind of continuity? Like, this isn't just standard government debt, right? That often comes with all sorts of short-term risks.
Exactly. The foundation of this entire strategy, it hinges on the strategic use of what are called ultra-long-term special government bonds. These are debt instruments that are specifically designed to fund projects that stretch far, far beyond typical 5-year political cycles, or even a decade.
And the scale must be massive.
Oh, it's immense. To give you a sense of the scale for the 2026 plan, the central government is planning to seriously ramp up its issuance of these bonds. We're talking approximately 2 trillion yuan.
Which is roughly what in dollars?
That's around 275 billion US dollars. And you have to understand, that's capital focused specifically on strategic generational projects.
Yeah.
And that's just the central government.
Right. There are other layers.
Concurrently, you have local government that are expected to raise their own special purpose bond issuance up to around 5 trillion yuan. So what you're seeing is this massive coordinated fiscal expansion that is not designed for a quick fix. It's designed for a foundational transformation of the economy.
That is a staggering amount of capital. But why is the ultra long-term part of it so critical? I mean, what's the real difference when you compare this to how Western governments raise debt?
The maturity length, that is the crucial mechanism here. It's all about mitigating political risk. Typical sovereign debt, it often matures within 5 to 10 years.
Which means you have to keep refinancing it.
Precisely. And that refinancing constantly exposes major infrastructure projects to what you could call policy whiplash. If an election happens, power shifts, and the new administration comes in with different priorities, that project can just stall. All of a sudden, refinancing becomes politically toxic or just fiscally impossible.
We see that all the time. A rail project gets canceled halfway through.
All the time. But by extending the maturity of these special bonds, potentially into the 30 or even 50-year range, the state is essentially smoothing out all those repayment pressures. It reduces the refinancing risks over decades. It's an institutional shield. It guarantees stable funding flows.
So the capital is locked in.
It's locked in for the entire duration of a generational project. It guarantees that the construction of, say, a new national power grid won't be halted midway through just because the political mood changed or a different party took office. It institutionalizes strategic continuity.
So it's a deliberate strategy to pull core infrastructure funding out of that chaotic annual budget cycle, to get it away from electoral influence. But where is all this capital actually going? Is it just spread thinly across the economy?
No, quite the opposite. This is where that precision drip irrigation metaphor becomes very literal. Unlike a broad stimulus package, which is just hoping for a generalized economic lift, these funds are channeled into very specific high-impact sectors. And those sectors are defined by the 15th five-year plan, which covers 2026 through 2030. The focus is incredibly specific. They're targeting measurable physical layer bottlenecks in the economy. So, for example, a significant portion goes into urban renewal. And we're not talking about just cosmetic fixes.
Not just a new coat of paint.
No, this is deep infrastructure modernization. It includes things like affordable housing construction, which serves a dual purpose. It stimulates construction, sure, but it also addresses social stability, which is a long-term goal.
And it seems like all these targets are structured to address fundamental material constraints, rather than just boosting consumption for a quarter or two.
Precisely. Beyond the cities, there's a huge investment in rural integration, improving public services and infrastructure in underdeveloped regions. The goal is to bridge that urban-rural divide and, unlock consumption potential for the long term. And crucially, a huge portion is directed toward capital equipment upgrades for key manufacturing sectors. That's to ensure their machinery stays globally competitive. And then underpinning all of it is this massive investment in digitalization initiatives. Smart infrastructure.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me, because the ambition here isn't just better roads or housing. It sounds like they're trying to build the entire digital foundation of the future economy. The plan is hyper-focused on establishing a massive national data infrastructure. What does that even entail? The state capacity required for that seems remarkable.
It's truly foundational work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on the scale of a national highway system or a power grid. But for the 21st century, the government has set up the National Data Administration, the NDA, which is the country's top data governance regulator.
So they have a specific body just for this?
Yes. And the infrastructure it's defining, it's not just a bunch of server farms. It's a whole new type of national architecture that governs the entire life cycle of data. We are talking about achieving what some are calling computational sovereignty on a national scale. The NDA's mandate is incredibly broad. It covers every aspect of data. The collection, the aggregation, transmission, processing, circulation, utilization, operation, and of course the security. The goal is to standardize the whole data ecosystem.
Why is that so important?
Well, so that technological breakthroughs in one area, say in AI research, can immediately and seamlessly interface with industrial applications in another, like smart manufacturing. It's about eliminating friction.
Okay, so if the NDA is the brain, what are the actual physical components? The 4 pillars they're funding with these long-term bonds.
Right. The plan focuses on 4 specific interconnected pillars. The first one is data circulation and utilization facilities. This involves creating the regulatory framework, sure, but more importantly, the physical platforms you need for large-scale standardized data exchange, secure interconnectivity across all industries. The second, and this is the one that's incredibly resource-intensive, is computing power facilities. These are the engines. The critical engines for AI, for large language models, for advanced scientific modeling, all of it. This means building out huge server farms, often in very specific locations, optimized for cooling and power.
Right. The geography matters a lot for that kind of thing.
It's critical. And it's not just the servers. It's the massive power and cooling infrastructure needed to sustain what they call exascale computing.
And the third pillar, that seems to be about just getting all this data moving, connectivity.
It is. The third is network facilities. This means a huge coordinated national effort to upgrade the current 5G network to what's called 5G Advanced, or 5GA. And this isn't just a slight speed bump. 5GA offers massive improvements in latency and connection density.
Which is what you need for things like self-driving cars or automated factories.
Exactly. In industrial automation, the Internet of Things, that's where this becomes crucial. And at the same time, they're pouring money into accelerating 6G research to make sure they lead the next generation of connectivity standards. And finally, the fourth pillar is security facilities. This is about making sure the whole structure is robust, resilient, and safe from both external threats and internal vulnerabilities. It's about guaranteeing data integrity and national computational security.
That is an incredibly complex, multi-layered project. Given the immense capital and coordination it requires, what does the timeline even look like? Because a typical 4-year election cycle would just derail this instantly.
And that's exactly why the long-term planning is so essential. The timeline itself is proof of this strategic continuity. The top-level design, setting up the standards and the regulatory frameworks, that's targeted for completion between 2024 and 2026.
Right now.
Right now. Then the next phase, which is integrating the data networks and building out those core computing power facilities, that's scheduled for 2027 and 2028. And here's the critical part. The main structure of the entire national data infrastructure, meaning the foundational physical layer is operational and integrated, is scheduled for completion by 2029.
Wow.
So a decision that's made today using the 2026 bond issuance will be bearing physical fruit for the entire economy over the next 3-5-year plans. That depth of commitment, irrespective of any shorter-term economic bumps in the road, is what really sets this system apart.
Which brings us back down to the human element. How does this kind of abstract, high-level planning actually translate into reality on the ground? We have this remarkable story of an engineer Chen in Anhui province who saw this transition firsthand.
The story of engineer Chen is it's a perfect microcosm of how this abstract fiscal policy becomes concrete, physical reality. Chen was a veteran electrical engineer. He spent decades dealing with an aging patchwork power grid in a developing inland area. His whole career was basically defined by patching up old power lines and managing seasonal blackouts.
A tough job. But then with the arrival of this 2026 plan, his reality it shifted profoundly.
It completely changed. He became a supervisor for the installation of AI-managed superconducting nodes for the next generation intelligent grid. These nodes are incredibly sophisticated pieces of hardware. They're designed to balance energy loads from solar and wind farms 1,000 miles away with millisecond precision. They completely eliminate the old instability he was used to.
So for him, it wasn't just some abstract policy announcement.
No, for him, the arrival of this hardware wasn't sudden. It was the inevitable physical result of a blueprint that had been circulating among technical planners for years.
And the key takeaway from his experience, the thing that really highlights the system's effectiveness, is that he watched as the funding flowed directly into the hardware. It bypassed all the bureaucratic fluff, as they call it, the endless feasibility studies, the political arguments that plague projects elsewhere.
It illustrates a state capacity that can just execute. Chen was working with this quiet, almost eerie certainty because he knew these long-term bonds ensured the roadmap for this grid extended 30 years into the future. That level of operational stability allows for investment in genuinely sophisticated, future-oriented tech that it doesn't make financial sense under a 4-year political horizon.
The capital is surgical, and the commitment is generational.
Exactly.
It's a sobering reminder that, while electoral politics celebrates procedural rituals, there's a profound civilizational strength in just having the lights stay on and knowing the future is being planned with this kind of cold, effective precision. The contrast with project delays from policy whiplash is it's stark.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of precision demonstrates a superior technocratic capacity. It's the ability to use specialized data and policy implementation to make decisions based on long-term metric performance like grid stability or computing power or patent conversion rates, instead of short-term voter appeal or immediate quarterly profits. It's an approach that is focused entirely on building long-term national competitiveness.
That continuity really is the core differentiator here. The systems we're comparing seem to operate on completely different timelines. You have the game of musical chairs in one place and this multi-decadal relay race in the other. The structural advantage, it seems rooted in the East Asian concept of the developmental state, which this sources really emphasizes the engine of this planning capacity.
It's fascinating when you really define the core political structure that allows for such immense long-term stability. A developmental state, it's a term used by political economy scholars, and it's defined as a state that focuses intently and strategically on economic development, one where the state maintains autonomous political power and actively directs the economy.
So it's not just a regulator setting the rules of the game.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's the driver of the vehicle. It's deciding the destination and the route. And this interventionist approach, it relies on extensive regulation, planning, and resource mobilization.
And how is the state structured internally to achieve that kind of autonomy?
The structure is paramount. The policy is primarily guided by bureaucratic government elites, and they are intentionally shielded from direct electoral pressure. And this insulation, it provides the institutional freedom to pursue national interests over the very, very long term without being constantly disrupted by the demands of short-term corporate lobbying or, working class interests focused on quick populist gains.
Right. And what's central to that is the idea of a meritocratic bureaucracy. The term used is the Weberian scale.
That's it. It refers to a highly professionalized, rationalized administration where officials are recruited through these strict competitive entrance exams, and they're rewarded with predictable, long-term careers that are based purely on performance.
So the idea is that this professional, autonomous bureaucracy is just better equipped to handle the insane complexity of multi-decadal industrial planning than a system that's subject to constant electoral whims.
Absolutely. The literature on this is pretty clear. This type of administration is significantly more effective at facilitating complex capitalist growth, especially when you compare it to systems where positions are based on patronage or immediate political loyalty. In these developmental states, the experts say the politicians reign while the professional technical bureaucracy rules.
Ensuring continuity and competence are prioritized.
That's the goal.
That's incredibly powerful when it comes to mobilizing resources. When you apply this model, what does policy intervention actually look like in practice? How do they direct capital without the whole system becoming inefficient or overly rigid?
The intervention is direct, it's focused, and it's iterative. These states can mobilize the majority of capital into whatever industrial sector is identified as having the maximum spillover effect for the entire economy. So sectors like advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, or next-generation energy.
And how do they execute that?
Through very targeted industrial policies. They use subsidies, they control access to credit, they provide long-term low-interest loans specifically to improve the competitiveness of firms in those priority sectors. It's this intimate, stable cooperation between the state, the bureaucracy, and major national industries that's crucial for maintaining a macroeconomy that is just relentlessly directed toward technological ascent.
Let's apply this framework to probably the most critical strategic race globally right now.
Yeah.
Semiconductor self-sufficiency. This requires immense multi-decadal patience and capital.
The policy continuity in the semiconductor sector is the definitive case study. You can just see the sustained commitment summarized by initiatives like Delete America or Xinchuang, which means IT innovation.
And this isn't just a recent reaction?
Not at all. This isn't a reaction to a single geopolitical event. It's a sustained long-term goal that was established years ago to reduce reliance on foreign tech and to hedge strategically against recurring export controls and geopolitical uncertainty. And the sheer scale of the financial commitment is just undeniable. The primary vehicle here is the National Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, which most people just call the Big Fund. It's been channeling support since 2014, and critically, it's contributed something like $95 billion across 3 substantial rounds of funding, with the latest big injection coming in May 2024.
$95 billion over a decade, just systematically invested in building a domestic supply chain from the ground up. I mean, that kind of sustained commitment is almost unheard of in systems that are driven by short-term shareholder returns.
And this commitment has produced very specific, measurable outcomes. We see this clear strategic dominance emerging in the area of legacy chips.
So the older, more established nodes.
Exactly, the 28 nanometer or larger chips. These aren't the sexy, cutting-edge AI chips, but they are absolutely essential for the foundational economy for cars, home appliances, medical devices, industrial machinery. And the output forecasts are dramatic. By 2027, the prediction is that they will capture 39% of the global legacy chip market. This dominance is being driven by the sheer scale of investment in capacity. In 2024 alone, the country added more production capacity in this legacy segment than the rest of the world combined. That is a foundational power shift in the material economy.
But the real prize and the source of all the current geopolitical tension is the advanced nodes. The 7 nanometer and smaller chips used in cutting-edge AI. How does this structural continuity translate there, where the technological barriers are just so much higher?
That is where the long-term planning really shows its resilience. Domestic firms like Huawei are rapidly closing that technological gap, even with intense external pressure. For example, their Ascend 910B chip, a 7 nanometer equivalent, is considered comparable to NVIDIA's restricted A100. And what's more, they're already planning the Ascend 920 AI chip as an alternative to the highly advanced H20 chips.
So they're building their own internal substitutes.
It's a critical strategy. Historically, Chinese cloud companies sourced about 80% of their high-end AI chips from NVIDIA. The forecasts show that reliance falling off a cliff in the coming years as these domestic alternatives mature. This planned obsolescence of foreign dependency is a direct result of that multi-decadal industrial policy.
This kind of stability must have enormous implications for talent, for the actual engineers and researchers who are executing these incredibly complex blueprints. If the policy is erratic, the talent will follow the stability.
It translates directly into a competitive advantage in attracting and retaining skilled professionals. I came across this really powerful anecdote about a researcher named Sarah. She made the decision to move from a prestigious Silicon Valley startup to a semiconductor firm in Suzhou.
That story really captured the psychological drain of instability. She called it the 4-year fever in the West.
Precisely. In the Western environment, the 4-year fever is this constant anxiety that every new administration might scrap the industrial subsidies or pivot the entire trade strategy or just fundamentally change R&D priorities. That political uncertainty leaves these long-term, multi-year projects incredibly vulnerable to sudden termination. It's hard to commit 20 years of your life to a project that might get defunded because of a 2-point swing in a state election.
So when she moved to Suzhou in 2026, she found a completely different environment.
She did. She entered a culture of what she called decadal continuity. Her new mentor showed her a blueprint for semiconductor self-sufficiency that had been drafted almost a decade earlier and was just being executed with this surgical, quiet consistency. There was no risk of her highly technical department being, deplatformed because of a shift in the populist winds or a sudden demand for quick profits. This kind of environment, it rewards technical milestones and patient, long-term work. It insulates the science from the noise of politics.
The system essentially acts as a strategic shield. For scientists, the ability to actually finish a 20-year project without it being used as a political football or being subject to constant changing directives is, well, it's perhaps the greatest operational freedom you can have.
And that is the structural advantage writ large. While some external analyses might point to potential rigidity in a bureaucracy that's shielded from immediate public scrutiny, the evidence shows that this stability allows for the effective attraction and retention of the global talent you need to execute these complex, long-horizon projects. The meritocratic framework ensures competence is prioritized for the long-term national interest, and the results, like the rapid closing of the AI chip gap, are tangible.
We just keep coming back to these hard physical metrics, megawatts, nanometers, patents. This section needs to focus on how this governance model translates into physical, measurable strength, specifically looking at industrial power consumption data. The deep-seated belief here seems to be that if you aren't fundamentally building things and converting energy into output, you are in some way decaying.
This raises a really important, almost existential question that defines this post-globalization era. If the West became defined by financialization, by outsourcing, by relying on service sector bubbles, then the focus on physical output metrics like industrial electricity consumption is viewed as the definitive evidence of civilizational resilience. The electricity meter is the ultimate objective ledger of material activity. It rejects the ephemeral nature of financial metrics.
Let's ground this with some data. What is the scale of these physical metrics we're talking about?
The numbers are, frankly, staggering. China's gross electricity demand was approaching the colossal mark of 10,000 terawatt hours at the end of 2024.
Okay, put that in perspective for us.
The entire United States, a massive industrial and services economy, consumes around 4,000 terawatt hours annually. So the system we are discussing accounts for over 1/3 of all global electricity consumption since 2023. This isn't just a difference in size, it's a difference in kind.
That's the baseline size, but it's the growth rate that really tells the story of intentional transformation and future planning.
Absolutely. The crucial observation is that electricity consumption is growing faster than GDP. Consumption rose about 7% year over year in both 2023 and 2024, despite slower overall economic growth of around 5%.
And that trend is continuing.
It's projected to continue robustly. Consumption is forecast to increase by 6% annually from 2025 to 2027, even if GDP growth remains around 4%.
So what does that discrepancy signal?
It signals a deep structural transformation. The increase in electricity demand is outpacing mere economic expansion, which indicates a rapid and deep electrification across heavy industry and new high-tech sectors. Over the next 3 years, the country will effectively be adding 3 times the annual electricity demand of a country like Canada. This massive increase in energy consumption is the material engine of ascending the technological ladder.
And crucially, how is that staggering amount of energy being used? Where is it going? Because that tells you where a nation's structural priorities really lie.
It speaks volumes about the civilizational priority. Industry consumes approximately 60% of all electricity in China.
60%.
60. Contrast that sharply with the OECD average, which is around 32%. This delta, this gap, it's not an accident. It's a result of structural policy. And furthermore, nearly half, 48% of the increase in Chinese electricity demand between 2022 and 2024 came from the industrial sector alone. This represents a deliberate, massive commitment to material output.
What specifically is driving that surge in industrial demand? Is it just traditional heavy industry?
A major driver is the electricity-intensive manufacturing of what they call new energy products. So this includes the vast scale-up in solar modules, high-capacity batteries, and electric vehicles. And of course, the numerous electricity-intensive upstream processes you need for defining and processing all the raw materials involved.
Those sectors are notoriously power-hungry.
Immensely. They demand huge amounts of power just to maintain their growth rate. The manufacturing of these new energy products alone is estimated to have consumed more than 300 terawatt-hours of electricity in 2024. That single sector consumed roughly the entire annual electricity consumption of Italy. And the consumption of this sector rose by about 230 terawatt-hours over 2022-2024, which makes up nearly 35% of the total industrial demand increase during that period.
This sounds less like just responding to market demand and more like a top-down, planned, philosophical commitment to powering industry, regardless of the immediate cost.
It is supported by an electricity-first philosophy. This mandate ensures that investment in power sources and grids is moderately advanced, meaning it stays ahead of the rapid industrial demands rather than lagging behind. They're leveraging AI and digital technologies to empower new business forms, like virtual power plants and collaboration between massive computing infrastructure and the electrical grid. This is how the system ensures reliable and safe consumption of high volumes of new energy, which is a massive technological feat of coordination.
And we have the perspective of a key player in this physical economy, a factory manager, Mr. Lai in the Pearl River Delta. He sees the industrial electricity meter as the nation's pulse monitor.
Mr. Lee's perspective just perfectly encapsulates this materialist truth. While global headlines might be focused on ephemeral, financialized metrics like stock market performance or quarterly earnings reports, his entire focus is on physical output and, critically, on patent conversion rates.
The measure of turning ideas into reality.
Exactly. Turning abstract intellectual property into tangible, humming machinery on the factory floor.
So for him, the constant pursuit of greater industrial electricity consumption isn't just good business, it's a civilizational imperative.
He views the structural decisions you see elsewhere, deindustrialization, financialization, reliance on service sector bubbles, as simply managing decay. In his view, the commitment to industrial electricity consumption signifies a system that is actively building, transforming raw materials, and ascending the technological ladder. If the meter isn't running, the nation isn't building a future.
And this relentless focus on material output, it's buttressed by a pretty profound structural advantage in energy costs, which the data points out.
It absolutely is. This strong state capacity, focused on industrial output, ensures competitiveness through structural subsidies. Preliminary data for 2024 gives us a powerful comparison. Average industrial electricity prices in the European Union are still 65% higher than they were in 2019.
Which is a huge disadvantage.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And critically, these EU prices are double those in the United States and 50% higher than those in China.
That structural energy cost advantage is a massive sustained subsidy for energy-intensive industries.
It completely undermines the global competitiveness of Western rivals in critical sectors like chemicals, heavy manufacturing, and even advanced component production. This combination of structural financial stability, technocratic continuity, and subsidized energy costs. It creates a powerful, resilient system that's focused entirely on material advancement.
So what we've explored today is this profound structural divergence. We're looking at two distinct civilizational logics. One system prioritizes procedural rituals and electoral applause, which often results in policy paralysis and decaying physical infrastructure. The other system prioritizes material outcomes and cold, hard metrics.
The Chinese 2026 blueprint acts as a seamless junction between decades of planning. It uses sophisticated financial tools like these ultra-long-term bonds to surgically channel capital into future-defining technologies, specifically computing, next-gen power grids, and the full ecosystem of data infrastructure that's slated for completion by 2029.
And this structural advantage, which is rooted in a meritocratic, technocratic governance model, is what allows for that multi-decadal industrial continuity. It provides engineers and scientists with the stability and the strategic shield they need to execute these complex, long-horizon projects like semiconductor self-sufficiency without the constant disruption of electoral volatility.
At the end of the day, the ultimate ledger for this system is undeniably physical, not financialized. When we measure success in the sheer megawatts generated by industry, the nanometers etched onto chips, and the high patent conversion rates, that transformation of intellectual property into humming material machinery, we see a civilization that is meticulously managing its growth, focused entirely on material advancement. It's demonstrating a powerful and deliberate resilience that demands our attention. The cold, clinical verdict of the data suggests that one system is actively, surgically building its future. The other is struggling to manage its own entropy.